Dust clings to leather sandals. A man walks down a limestone road, the midday sun beating hard against the back of his neck. We read the names of the towns Bethlehem, Capernaum, Jericho, Jerusalem, Tyre, Sidon, and we treat them like ancient staging areas. The pigs rush down the steep, chalky cliff. They crash into the dark water. The sea swallows them. The man sits clothed. His mind is quiet. He begs to follow the rabbi back across the border into Jewish territory. Jesus refuses. He leaves him there, a healed man sitting among pagan tombs, to be the first missionary to the Gentile world. The map is expanding. The borders of Israel are not a fence to keep the holy inside. They are a starting line. He is systematically walking into the darkest corners of the ancient map, confronting the oldest enemies of God on their own home turf, and taking the ground back, inch by inch. But taking back the margins is not enough. To claim the entire world, he has to walk to the geographic center of pagan worship, stand in the shadow of a massive rock, and force his disciples to answer one question. Matthew chapter 16 brings the map to its ultimate crisis point. If you look at a biblical map, Caesarea Philippi sits at the far northern edge of the region. Nestled at the base of Mount Hermon, it is lush and green. But in the ancient world, it was spiritually dark, built directly into a massive, towering cliff face of red rock. We see them as a random assortment of first-century zip codes, where the parables and the miracles happened to take place. Was a gaping cave where spring water surged out from deep underground. The Greeks and Romans believed this specific cave was the literal doorway to the underworld. They called it the Gates of Hades. The entire precinct was devoted to the worship of Pan, the half-goat god of panic and chaos. Niche shrines were carved directly into the rock face. The air surrounding the cave constantly smelled of burning incense, roasting meat, and the blood of pagan sacrifices echoing off the stone walls. This is not a place a Jewish rabbi brings his disciples. Yet Jesus marches his followers 25 miles uphill just to stand in the shadow of this specific rock. He lines them up, with the gaping mouth of the underworld right behind him. And he asks them the defining question of his ministry. "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answers, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replies, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it." For centuries, we have read this as purely a theological statement about Peter's confession. But the physical geography changes the weight of the words. Jesus is standing in front of a giant wall of stone. He is standing at a place known globally as the Gates of Hades. We think the message is entirely in the sermons, and the geography is just the commute. He is not just using a metaphor. He is pointing at the cliff. The rock he is referring to is not just a theological concept. It is the pagan stronghold itself. He is standing at the dark center of enemy territory, pointing to the very entrance of their underworld, and declaring that his kingdom is going to crush it. He is telling his disciples that his assembly, his church, is going to be built right on top of the enemy's greatest monuments. The gates of hell are not a weapon. They are a boundary. Gates do not march across a battlefield to attack you. Gates stand still to keep you out. When Jesus says, "The gates of hell will not prevail," he is fundamentally changing the posture of his people. The church is not a defensive bunker. It is a battering ram. Hell is the one playing defense. He plants his flag at the darkest edge of the map. He establishes his identity in the hardest soil. But declaring war at the gates of hell means the war is finally going to require blood. The map pivots entirely. He turns his back to the safe, familiar north, and he sets his face toward the one city he has been avoiding. He turns south. The lush, green hills of the north fade. The temperature spikes. The elevation plummets to 1,000 feet below sea level, and it is true that he had to be somewhere to heal the blind and feed the crowds. The air grows thick and heavy. He steps into Jericho. It is the city of palms. It is the city of cursed ancient foundations. A blind beggar screams from the white dust of the roadside. Jesus stops. The man receives his sight. A corrupt tax collector climbs into the rough branches of a sycamore tree. Jesus calls him down. The man surrenders his wealth, but he does not stay. He turns his face toward the mountains. The ascent begins. It is 15 miles of brutal, steep, uphill terrain. The road winds through the Wadi Kelt. It is a narrow gorge of jagged, sun-baked limestone. Shadows stretch long and dark across the ravines. The cliffs rise sharply on either side. This is the literal valley of the shadow of death. This is the infamous Road of Thieves. The climb is exhausting. Water skins run dry. Sweat stings the eyes. The air grows cooler as the elevation rises. But the tension grows heavier. He walks out in front. His disciples follow behind, trailing in the dust, completely terrified. Every step is deliberate. Every step brings him closer to the altar. He reaches the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives. The golden towers of the temple are just out of sight over the ridge. He stops 2 miles short of the capital, but if you look closer at the exact sequence of the borders, he shatters. At the specific Hebrew and Aramaic roots of the soil he chooses to stand on, he rests in a small village. Bethany. The name holds the weight of the moment. In Aramaic, it is Bet Anya, the house of affliction. It is a colony for the sick, the outcast, the unclean. It is the final waiting room before Jerusalem. He walks into the house of affliction, and he finds a cemetery. His friend Lazarus is in the ground. He has been dead for 4 days. The sisters are weeping in the dirt. The crowd is wailing. The heavy, sweet stench of decay hangs in the afternoon heat. A massive stone seals the cave. Jesus weeps. He shouts into the dark. The stone is rolled away. A dead man walks out into the blinding sunlight, his hands and feet bound in grave clothes. The delay was not a logistical failure. It was a stage. The house of affliction becomes the house of resurrection. This miracle is the spark. The religious elites in the capital hear about the empty tomb. They panic. They call a council. The display of absolute power in Bethany is the exact event that seals his death warrant. The map is narrowing, though wide. Sweeping circles of Galilee are gone. The long, unexpected detours through Gentile territory are finished. The perimeter is secured. You start to see a layer of the story the commute reading completely ignores. The ground itself is speaking. Now, he aims for the center. The final destination sits just over the hill, waiting in the dark. But the destination is not just a capital city. In the 1st century, during the week of Passover, Jerusalem is an engine of sacrifice. Hundreds of thousands of pilgrims crowd the narrow, winding limestone streets. The air is thick with the smoke of outdoor fires and roasting meat. The metallic smell of blood runs in physical rivers down the stone gutters of the Temple Mount and empties into the Kidron Valley below. He does not hide. He rides straight into the center of the noise. He overturns the tables. He commands the temple courts. But when the final night arrives, he leaves the crowded upper room behind. Matthew chapter 26 sets the scene. The meal is over. The betrayer has already left to gather the guards. Jesus walks out into the dark, crosses the blood-stained water of the Kidron ravine, and steps into a grove of ancient trees at the base of the Mount of Olives. He falls to the ground in absolute agony. The English translations call this quiet garden Gethsemane, but that is a Greek transliteration of the original Hebrew. The actual name of the location is Gat Shmanim. The word Gat translates to a press, specifically a heavy, industrial stone press. The geography is not a backdrop. It is a theology. The locations are not random stops. They are a deliberate map of redemption. And Shmanim is the plural word for oils. He is kneeling in the oil press. To extract oil in the ancient world, you do not gently squeeze the fruit. You place the olives in a hollowed-out stone basin, and you drag a massive, crushing millstone over them. The pressure breaks the flesh. The pressure extracts the value. The heavier the stone, the purer the oil. In the book of Exodus, chapter 27, God commands, that only the purest. Beaten olive oil can be used to keep the light burning in the sanctuary. And in Luke chapter 22, as Jesus kneels in this specific garden, the text says his agony was so intense that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling into the dust. That physical location changes everything about the scene. Gethsemane is not a quiet sanctuary for a final prayer. It is a crushing floor. The agony in the dark is not a moment of hesitation. It is the beginning of the extraction. The heavy stone of God's justice is rolled over the Son. The unfathomable weight of human sin comes down squarely on his chest. The olive is crushed. The flesh is broken. The oil of the new covenant pours out into the dirt. He enters the garden whole, and he leaves it ready for the fire. He is arrested. He is beaten. He is dragged outside the city walls to a skull-shaped hill. He is nailed to a rough wooden beam. Every valley he descends into, every mountain he ascends, every foreign region he intentionally detours through carries a weight that the text alone doesn't fully explain, cut from the earth. And he breathes his last. The physical walking is finished. The 3,000 miles of dust are complete, but the map he was drawing with his footsteps is only just beginning to make sense. Picture the scene just after the resurrection. A group of men stand on the dusty crest of the Mount of Olives. The wind pulls at their woven cloaks as they stare up into an empty sky. A cloud has just hidden the rabbi from their sight, leaving them with nothing but the echo of a command to go to the ends of the earth. But if you look back at the 3 years of footsteps that brought them to this mountain, you realize Jesus had already drawn the map they were supposed to follow. He did not move randomly from village to village based on where the crowds happened to gather. He executed a perfect, expanding theological circle over the ancient world. He started his life in the house of bread, claiming the ancient promises of Israel. He went down into the dark of Egypt, stepping directly into the historical trauma of his people. He grew up as a defiant green shoot in Nazareth, until you understand the physical earth beneath his feet. He is tracing a very specific pattern over the land of Israel and the Gentile world beyond it, proving that God prefers to work with dead stumps. Then, he expanded the radius. He anchored his ministry in the village of comfort to bind up the broken. He deliberately crossed the filthy, demon-possessed waters of the Decapolis to prove his authority extended to pagan soil. He marched his disciples to the bleeding altars at the gates of Hades to put the underworld on defense. And finally, he turned south. He walked up the deadly ravine into the house of affliction to conquer the grave, before kneeling under the crushing weight of the oil press to bleed for the sins of the world. His itinerary was not a travelogue. It was a conquest. Every border he crossed was an intentional assault on the kingdoms of darkness. Every specific soil he chose to stand on was carefully selected to fulfill a prophecy, to reverse a historical failure, or to heal a deep cultural wound. He walked the map to prove that there is no corner of human existence, no matter how pagan or broken or historically cursed, that his authority cannot reach. And that is the profound beauty of reading the Gospels with the geography in your hands. Because when you trace, to read the Gospels without the map is to read the lyrics without hearing the music. But to feel the weight of this map, every step, from that first night in Bethlehem to that final afternoon outside the walls of Jerusalem, you are left with a pattern that speaks directly to where you are standing right now. He drew his first breath in the house of bread and became the meal for a starving world. He went down into the trauma of Egypt and pulled a new exodus out of the dark. He grew up as a green shoot in the dead stump of Nazareth and proved that obscure soil can still bear fruit. He anchored his power in the village of comfort and bound up the bleeding and the broken. He marched to the gates of Hades and put hell itself on the defensive. He stepped into the house of affliction and called a dead man out of the grave. He knelt under the crushing weight of the oil press and poured out a covenant that covers us all. One map, one mission, one king. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the borders. He didn't stay in the safe, familiar hills of the Galilee. He intentionally crossed He stops at a well in a Samaritan village where the water is deep and the hostility is older than the stones. You have to start where the story first touches the ground. You have to start before the 3 years of walking even begin. Water into the Decapolis. He walked into a pagan graveyard, thick with the smell of the sea and rusted iron. In chains. Just to sit with a naked man who was cutting his own flesh with limestone. He walked off the dast edge of the acceptable map, because that is exactly where the rescue was needed. If you are in a season where you feel like you have wandered off the edge of the map, if you are sitting in your own version of the Decapolis, surrounded by the wreckage of your own choices, convinced that your failures have permanently placed you outside the borders of grace, look at his footsteps. The shepherd does not stay in the sanctuary. He crosses the press, water. He walks into the dirt. The physical geography of the Gospels is the ultimate proof that there is no territory too dark, no history too broken, and no exile too far for his reach to find you. And may the God who walked the hardest valleys of the ancient world walk with you through yours and remind you that no matter where you are standing, you are never off his map. If this opened something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even. The map begins with a paradox. In the ancient Roman world, pedigrees and birthplaces dictated your destiny, and power always announced itself from the center. One word helps. Share this with someone who feels like they have wandered too far from home. And pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. Kings are born in capitals. Empires launch from palaces. But the physical map of the Gospels begins in obscurity. And the linguistic map begins with a very specific meal. Luke chapter 2 sets the scene. A young couple walks roughly 90 miles south from Galilee, their sandals kicking up limestone dust. Forced to register for an imperial census, they arrive at a tiny farming outpost 5 miles south of Jerusalem. The text calls it Bethlehem, a place crowded with travelers, smelling of damp wool and the smoke of outdoor fires. But in the original Hebrew text, the name of this village is Bet-Lechem. The word Bet translates to house. The word Lechem translates to bread, the house of bread. It appears multiple times in the Old Testament as a rural marker, the place where Ruth gleaned wheat in the fields, the place where David the shepherd king was anointed. It was also the town where the lambs destined for temple sacrifice in Jerusalem were born and raised. Fast forward 30 years. Jesus stands in front of a hungry crowd in John chapter 6, and he declares, "I am the bread of life." He paces the shoreline of a freshwater sea that smells of drying nets and rotting fish. That changes how you read the Nativity. The birthplace is not a geographical accident. It is an opening argument. The Savior of the world. The one who will literally break his own body like a loaf to feed a starving humanity, draws his first breath in a town named the House of Bread. He is laid in a feeding trough. The physical ground is already preaching the gospel before he ever opens his mouth. But the narrative does not stay in the House of Bread. Almost immediately, the map fractures. There is a sudden flight south into Egypt. Egypt is the ancient symbol of bondage, the trauma center of the Israelite memory, the furnace of their slavery. Jesus traces the exact footsteps of the Exodus, but in reverse. He goes down into the dark, and he comes back out. Matthew writes, "Out of Egypt I called my son," linking the physical geography of the new Savior to the physical history of the rescued nation. And then, he settles in the north. He moves to a town so insignificant, it is never once mentioned in the entire Old Testament, never mentioned in the Talmud, and completely ignored by ancient historians. Nazareth. It sits on a rocky ridge overlooking the Jezreel Valley. Isolated and backward, he climbs a mountain of cracked red rock, the wind howling through the ravines, carrying nothing but sand. It is the kind of place polite society mocks. A place that prompts Nathanael to ask in John chapter 1, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" But the soil speaks again. The name Nazareth is rooted in the Hebrew word netzer. A netzer is a shoot. It is a sprout. It is the tiny, defiant green branch that pushes up from a dead, chopped down stump hundreds of years earlier. The prophet Isaiah predicted that the royal line of David would be cut down like a tree, but that a Shudanetzer would eventually come up from the stump of Jesse. Nazareth is not just a rural zip code. It is a living metaphor for what God does with dead things. He spends 30 years in the town of the branch, growing in the silence. But when the time comes to finally act, he does not go to the temple to announce himself. He goes to the lowest place on the surface of the earth. He walks down into the Jordan Rift Valley. The elevation drops. The air grows heavy. The heat radiates off the chalky limestone cliffs. He stops at the edge of the Jordan River. The water is brown. Mud slicks against his ankles. The crowd pushes in from the muddy banks. He stands in the center of a paved temple courtyard. The air thick with the metallic tang of blood, the heavy smoke of roasting meat, and burning frankincense. They are confessing. They are weeping. They are washing. John stands waist-deep in the current. Jesus wades out to meet him. The Jordan is not just a body of water. It is a boundary line. Centuries earlier, Joshua led a wandering nation across this exact river to claim a promise. Now, a new Joshua, Yeshua, steps into the same water to inaugurate a new kingdom. He goes under. The water breaks. The sky tears open. A dove descends. A voice thunders. But the Spirit does not lead him back to the towns. The Spirit drives him into the wasteland. He walks into the Judean desert. The green fades. The earth turns to cracked salt and baked red clay. The wind carries the faint, bitter scent of sulfur from the Dead Sea. The midday sun beats down like a hammer against the rocks. There is no water. There is no bread. There is no shelter. He stays for 40 days. He starves. The stones mock him with the shape of baked loaves. The shadows stretch long across the canyon floor. The tempter arrives in the heat. This geography is intentional. The wilderness is not a punishment. It is a proving ground. He is tracing the footsteps of his ancestors. A nation wandered in the desert for 40 years. A savior starves in the desert for 40 days. Israel complained about the lack of bread. He walks. For 3 years, across roughly 3,000 miles of dirt, basalt, and water. He walks. Jesus rejects the bread of compromise. Israel tested God at Massah. Jesus refuses to test God at the Temple Peak. Israel bowed to idols for power. Jesus rejects the kingdoms of the world. Every failure of the past is met with victory in the present. Every broken footprint is paved over with perfect obedience. He faces the enemy on the exact terrain where his people originally lost the war. He survives the desert. He leaves the southern Badlands. He walks back north. He bypasses the religious elites in Jerusalem. He leaves the quiet isolation of Nazareth behind. He makes his way to the northern edge of a massive freshwater lake, where the smell of drying nets hangs in the humid air, and Roman tax collectors sit at the toll booths. He is about to choose a headquarters, and he picks a town whose very name is a prophecy about what he is about to do to the brokenhearted. Matthew chapter 4 marks a massive geographic shift. Jesus leaves the quiet hills of Nazareth and relocates his entire ministry to the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee. He sets up his headquarters in a town that sits directly on the Via Maris, the great ancient international trade route connecting Egypt to Damascus. It is a loud, crowded, chaotic place. He crosses borders that a rabbi is strictly forbidden to cross. He steps into pagan territories where the idols outnumber the Israelites. The air smells heavily of sun-baked fish and the sweat of passing merchants. The streets clinking with the copper and silver of Roman taxation. In English translations, we call this bustling hub Capernaum. But the Greek word Matthew puts on the page is actually a direct transliteration of its original Hebrew name. The location is Kfar Nahum. The noun Kfar means a rural town or a village, and Nahum comes from the Hebrew root nachum, which means to comfort, to console, or to bring relief. Capernaum is literally the village of comfort. Nachum is the exact same root word used in the famous cry of Isaiah chapter 40, where God looks at an exiled, exhausted people and says, "Comfort, comfort my people." If the hidden architecture of the biblical languages is giving you a completely new lens to read these ancient texts, you're exactly who this channel is for. Hit subscribe and leave a comment below about what's standing out to you so far. Because every week we dig beneath the English translations to find the bedrock. So Jesus walks into the village of comfort. And look at what he actually does there. Over the next 3 years, Kfar Nahum becomes ground zero for his deepest works of restoration. He heals a paralyzed man lowered through a cracked clay roof. He drives a burning fever out of Peter's mother-in-law. He retreats into wilderness, so barren it cannot sustain human life. And he presses into urban centers, so crowded the noise drowns out the prayers. He heals the servant of a Roman centurion. He restores a woman who has been bleeding for 12 years. And he pulls a 12-year-old girl out of the grip of death itself. He brings physical, spiritual, and social consolation to the broken. The location of his headquarters is not a logistical convenience. It is a theological declaration. He chose the village of comfort to prove that the consolation of Israel, promised by the ancient prophets, had finally arrived in the flesh. He anchored his power in a place whose very name promised relief to the exhausted. But the map of his ministry could not remain contained within the comfortable, familiar borders of the Galilee. The village of comfort was the hub, but it was not the boundary. To build a kingdom that would encompass the entire world, he had to step off the edge of the Jewish map entirely. He had to walk into the places where the ground itself belonged to the enemy. He leaves the lake. He crosses the northern border. He steps onto Gentile soil. The air shifts. The smell of freshwater fish is replaced by the heavy, rotting stench of crushed murex shells, the source of Tyre's famous purple dye. Most people read the Gospels and assume the map of his ministry is just a backdrop. Marble statues of Phoenician gods stare down from the colonnades. This is Tyre. This is Sidon. These are the ancient strongholds of Baal worship. These are the cities that gave Israel Queen Jezebel. They are the historic, generational enemies of the Jewish people. A rabbi does not walk here. A rabbi does not eat here. A rabbi does not breathe this air, but he walks. A Canaanite woman steps into the dusty road. She screams for her demon-possessed daughter. The disciples tell him to send her away. She refuses to leave. She begs for the crumbs falling from the master's table. He stops. He looks at her. He grants the request. The healing is not a geographical accident. It is a territorial claim. He leaves the coast. He turns southeast. He crosses back over the water and steps onto the eastern shore of the lake. He enters the Decapolis. 10 Greek cities. Roman architecture. Sprawling amphitheaters. Temples dedicated to Zeus. The ground is ceremonially unclean. The air is thick with the squealing of thousands of pigs feeding on the rocky hillsides. A man lives in the tombs. He is naked. He bleeds from the sharp limestone edges he uses to cut his own flesh. Iron chains hang broken and rusted from his wrists. A legion of demons speaks through him. They beg to be sent into the pigs. Jesus speaks.